Hello, and welcome to Coping with COVID, Building Resilience, a new podcast with me, Leyla Josephine, and Anne McKechnie. We'll be discussing how COVID-19 affects our mental health and some tips on how to cope with these unusual times. I'm a performance poet and theatre maker who works in lots of different social contexts, and Anne is a forensic clinical psychologist who specialises in trauma. She believes that sharing knowledge about mental well-being is really important for everyone. It's these expertise that we will be using to get to the heart of what's happening in people's minds right now and looking forward to the future. Hi, Anne.
Hi, Leyla. Nice to speak to you.
Nice to speak to you. How are you?
I'm good, actually. How are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. Good days and bad days. I think everyone's feeling the same.
Absolutely.
I'm really excited that we can have these conversations, and I'm really excited that we might be able to give people some practical help about how to deal with these kind of uncomfortable times. So I think we should just get right into it.
Yeah, fine. Fire away.
So you refer to COVID-19 as a global trauma. Could you talk a little bit about why you think that's the apt definition of what's happening in our minds?
Yeah. I mean, the reason I use that term is because I think it describes very well what's happening global, because clearly it's across the entire world. But also in terms of how psychologists define trauma, it's a no doubt, people would all agree, it's a very disturbing and distressing experience, which for many of us overwhelms our ability to cope. So that's the sort of psychological definition of trauma, is anything that overwhelms our psychological ability to cope. And it leads to feelings of helplessness, a lack of control, feeling unsafe, feeling disempowered. Our normal ways that we run our life are not there for us anymore. So our normal strategies and our normal coping, our normal routines aren't there. And I think most importantly of all, this source of this trauma, the source of the distress, is unseen. So it means that you can't actually identify where it's coming from. If I can compare it to a normal or sort of more everyday trauma, for example, being involved in a car crash, you can identify that it was a car that caused it. You might be able to identify the junction where it occurred. You might be able to even identify who had caused that accident if you were the victim of it. And you're able then to compartmentalize that event in your head. But when it's an unseen trauma, none of us can see, one of us might even know whether we've got this virus until we're showing the symptoms. It makes it harder to cope because it's unquantifiable and adds to the element of trauma.
That's really interesting, this idea of kind of unseen, because it definitely makes it a little bit more insidious, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's quite interesting, actually. I've heard one of my friends has a young child who's got terribly anxious about the trauma, about the COVID virus. And what she did was, because it's unseen and unidentifiable, she's drawn pictures of it. So she's taken the kind of image that's around, all around the media at the moment. She's drawn it, and what she's done is she's kind of mocked the colours of it. You look at that stupid virus; it's pink, for heaven's sake. What virus is pink? What's so dangerous that's pink? And has sort of almost personalised it by saying, and really, it's really stupid, because when you apply hot water and soap, it just melts away. So it makes it more visible. Yeah. And I think that's probably where using the face masks and gel and so on, it's not only a physical health measure, but it's also quite a psychological measure, because it gives us some element of control, some element of mastery over what's going on. And it's that lack of mastery which again adds to the potential impact of this as a trauma.
I think we could all learn from that child then. I think I might have to do that later on.
Absolutely.
Okay, so moving on, we know that things are ever changing, and that's kind of the only thing we do know at the moment. And what kind of effect does that uncertainty have on people's brains?
Yeah. Again, if I can talk about how we make sense of the world, we're hardwired as human beings to make meaning of our experiences. So again, going back to the car accident, if we are able to think, you know what, it was a bad day, the weather wasn't good, it was slippery, that guy was clearly on an off day, and it was just bad luck, we might feel a bit out of sorts for a few days, not be able to stop thinking about it, not be able to sleep, feel anxious. But because we can then put meaning to it and not personalise it, not see it as our fault, we're able to move on with it. If in that same car accident, though, we think this always happens to me, it's my fault, people hate me, that guy was deliberately aiming at my car, this always happens to me, never to anybody else, then that's actually what makes it harder to deal with it. So at the moment, because we can't give meaning around COVID, we're not able to say, well, actually, you know what, if I keep myself safe, I'm 100% certain not to get it, or my family are unlikely to get it, or, because we can't actually understand it. And with the ever-changing instructions that we're given, we're told it's really dangerous not to leave our house. And then we're told, actually, it's not so dangerous that you can't go out to exercise. That it means that we're often a little bit delayed in catching up, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
And that we have to assimilate that new normal, and we have to, our synapses in our brain have to kind of move through this new reality. And I think in some of the things I've written, I've also talked about this as like a bereavement.
Yeah.
And whenever we suffer any kind of bereavement, we go through stages, not in any set order, but we go through feeling shock and denial. So it just hasn't happened. This can't be true. It hasn't happened. I'll wake up in the morning, it'll all be a bad dream. We then feel often very sad about it, very angry. We can feel a lot of guilt, sort of almost that sort of sense of what could I have done? What have I done differently? In a death, people will say, I wish I hadn't had that argument, or if I hadn't done this. We can also feel quite angry. So you're feeling quite irritable and angry and, really losing the plot sometimes about things. And this is all part of our mind's way of laying down new understanding of the world in our synapses, in the nerves that are in our brains. So we lay down those tracks to understand the new normal. Now, I think this is a little bit like with COVID. It's like our old lifestyle has died, and our current lifestyle is critical. And we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what's going to happen. So we can't actually assimilate that new knowledge, which means we often get stuck in feeling sad or anxious or irritable. And that leads to a lack of being able to sleep, poor concentration, poor memory sometimes, lack of energy. All of these things are our brains essentially assimilating and integrating that new information.
Yeah, so it sounds like our brains are kind of working in overdrive at the minute. So that kind of brings me on to talk a little bit about work, because obviously people are working from home at the minute, and that brings up all sorts of different difficulties like concentration, as you said, but also just like mood swings and anger and all these things that maybe people aren't used to having. And what I mean by that is, some people are quite used to having to deal with their mental health, but some it's really new. And what do you say to those people that it's really new?
Yeah, I would say this is perfectly normal. Think for there are some people who you're right, have been quite used to dealing with trauma. For some people who've actually are dealing with mental health difficulties. For some people, not everybody, but some people with more chronic anxiety conditions, this is actually they've managed this because they've been used to living with anxiety
it's like
for a long time.
Right, finally, kind of.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I've heard people saying that who are agoraphobic, who've got OCD. I told you there was a bug out there. And that's not trivializing what they're going through. It's just saying that they've learned to live with this. For other people as well, it's taken a lot of strain away in that actually they might find social contact difficult. They might find that they have no desire to go outside. They don't want to have to, interact with wider society. So this is actually it helps them. But also this trauma is affecting everybody. So if people have got mental health problems as a result of either adulthood or childhood trauma and adversity, then that is a personal thing, whereas this isn't personal. This is affecting everybody. But I suppose going back to the workplace, Some people, again, have been used to working from home and might well have a structure around that. But what we're now doing is we're working at home in the context of this global trauma, this external low-grade chronic anxiety that is around for everybody. And that impairs our ability to concentrate and our ability to remember things. So for people who are used to working from home, it's about saying, don't expect yourself to do what you always did before when you were working from home, because your concentration is reduced. Your internal processing unit is down by about 60% capacity because of this external information we've got to assimilate. If you add on to that, if you're working at home, for the first time, or you're working at home and now you've got children or your partner or other members of the household around, then that's further going to reduce your capacity. So people have got to understand, both from an employee and an employer work point of view, that we don't have the same capacity to work as we did before.
And for employers that are working kind of digitally with their employees, how can they kind of pick up on signals that their employees might be struggling if we don't usually have those physical or behavioural kind of indicators that someone's struggling? Because it's quite hard to see that through Zoom or whatever kind of digital communication device that they're using.
Yeah, it is very hard. It's very hard to read a room as well when you're working remotely. I think the simple answer is to ask them, but not necessarily to make it a blunt question. So you might want to say, lots of people are telling me that they're really struggling at the moment, that some people are finding it's difficult to concentrate, or that are feeling quite tearful, or they can't sleep. And that person might say, no, that's not me. But if you lay the groundwork by saying lots of people are feeling like this, it makes it easier for people to then say, actually, yeah, that's been me. But also, I think people have got to know that if they tell you that you're not going to say, well, that's ridiculous. What have you got to worry about? You're living in a nice house, and you've got a garden. They want to have that acknowledged, that validated, because that's the other thing about dealing with any, emotional strain, is you want it to be validated. You want somebody to say, you know what, I totally get that, totally understand where you're coming from. But also to be able to say, and look, this is what we've found is quite helpful for other people. So giving them pointers on, courses for mindfulness, making suggestions around mindfulness, artwork, creativity, distractions, also giving permission to distract. My viewpoint in the organisations I consult to is I've said to them, it'd be better to get somebody working well for 15 minutes and doing it in several 15-minute sections throughout the day than for them to staring at a screen for an hour and doing nothing.
Definitely. And it's a really good opportunity for them to kind of implement this sense of well-being, not just in COVID, but if they do it now, then there's potential that they can take it forward. And that's actually really valuable, I think, for businesses.
Absolutely. I think it is totally valuable, because I think what you see is if people feel valued, not just in terms of their output, but in terms of their well-being, if they feel valued by an organisation, they will go that bit further. They will go that extra mile. So it makes sense. It's not about being soft and warm and cuddly. It's actually about being realistic. At the end of the day, we employ human beings with all the fallibilities that human beings bring with them. And it's only fair to them to acknowledge that and to make space for it. I think there's often a bit of a cynicism, which might be around, well, you know what, if we tell people that they've got, they can have a mental health day, then they'll really, a lot of them will abuse that and they won't work properly. Well, some people will always abuse systems. That's so true, nature of society. Some people are always going to take the piss. But there'll be more people who will say, you know what, actually, I really appreciate that. And one of the things that most businesses don't want to do is to have a high turnover of staff, because that's expensive.
Yeah, definitely. And what do you think about the employers? Because obviously we've talked about the employees, but what about the employers that might not have that person above them to be looking out for them, and is taking on all this stuff from their teams? Because, you could be working with a team of 20 or even more than that. And that's a lot for someone to be kind of carrying on their shoulders. So what advice would you give to the employers about how to look after their own mental health?
I think it's very, very important that if you're going to have a sort of mental health or psychologically aware organisation, I've worked with lots of organisations to be trauma informed, courts and of other legal organisations, and it's really, really important that you get senior management buy-in. If you don't have somebody at the senior level, right at the board level, who's setting up your work agendas, who's actually saying this is a standing agenda item, then there's no point in it coming from the bottom up. It's got to come from senior level down.
And what about
so you've
go on, sorry.
You've then got to have, there's got to be a kind of ongoing support system. For example, if I can talk about my own, I support a lot of people in organisations to manage jobs that they're doing, which are front and centre dealing with really horrible trauma. I myself have somebody that I have for my supervision. So there's always, and she's got people that she's doing her supervision. So there's always somebody that you can turn to. I'm a great believer in what we call reflective practice. Now, reflective practice is about, essentially, it's what it says in the tin. It gives you a chance to stop and reflect and think about what you've learned, how it's worked, how it's not worked, and also to incorporate a bit about how did that feel for you? Not in a fluffy way, but in a just kind of, was that good? Was it not so good? Were you frustrated? Were you angry? Were you irritable? And because I think a lot of meetings are very much task-centred. Yeah. So you'll go into a meeting and it'll be, have you done this, this, and this? A reflective practice session allows you to think, I did this, it didn't go very well. I would do that differently next time. Or actually, that was really good and it made me feel positive. So these reflective practice sessions, they don't have to be very long, but they've been integrated into health and social care work for a long time.
Yeah.
The legal profession in Australia is introducing it. I've introduced it into another legal setting that I'm working with. So it's really, and it's gone down quite well. When you talk about it being, led by a psychologist, people get a bit twitchy because, they all think we can read minds and see through walls and predict the future. But if you've got somebody who's just sitting and just facilitating that conversation, it can be really, really helpful.
And that sounds much easier, than talking about your feelings, because I think some people are still quite scared of that. But it sounds like it's much more simply worded, so they don't actually have to talk about, why they feel like that. They just have to kind of state their emotions. Would that be correct? Or?
Absolutely. And I think having a conversation now about emotions, it doesn't have to be a heavy one. It doesn't have to be going back to, childhood experiences or particularly distressing things. And I think people are often worried that there's an expectation that, you will have to start talking about really horrible things. Whereas actually it can just be talking about, I had that meeting with that guy who was in the sales force and he was a real idiot and it made me really angry. And I realised I was also really angry because I wasn't prepared myself for the meeting, whatever it happens to be, but actually having that chance to think back and reflect, and that builds somebody's resilience.
And also that transparency, I hope that employers would, not kind of punish anyone for feeling like that. And that's kind of new, I think, because I think there has been a lot of shame of being like, oh, I'm talking about failure at all, really. But now I think that people are realizing that failures are just part of life, and actually to kind of embrace that, which I think is brilliant.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, if you don't learn unless you make mistakes. I think if we think about when a child is learning, a child falls over a lot when they're learning to walk. If they stood up and walked straight away first thing and then fell down out of the blue 6 months later, they'd probably never get up again. So it's that sense that actually you learn by your mistakes. And we live in a society that doesn't accept that people can fail. And if you see it as just didn't succeed this time, but it's giving you a chance to try again, we also are more likely to firmly embed learning if we fail.
Yes.
So if it's part of that repetitive nature. Again, if we think about children, that stage where do the same thing over and over and over again. The book that's read over and over again, the puzzle that's done over and over again. That is about embedding that kind of ritualistic behaviour that children have, even around the routines and the structures at bedtime and all of these things. It's all about embedding that learning. So we have to accept that we, even as adults, we have to fail to be able to continue our learning. If I can just talk personally, I'm sort of scrubbing up on my German. And when I first got back into it, I found I was really struggling. And it'd be easy to think, what, I'm way too old for this. It's been far too long. I can't possibly do it. But I persisted. And it's like almost like a wall coming down. I can see that there are holes appearing in the wall, and I'm getting there. But there are still times when it's difficult. So it's about recognizing that actually the harder it is to start it off, so to speak, the easier it is to keep it going. Does that
definitely
make sense?
And I see that a lot within my own work, because I work in schools a lot, and what I do is kind of so creative that there's no right or wrong answer, and that can make young people feel quite frightened sometimes, because they're so used to being told this is how you do it, there's no other way, and if you don't do it like this, then it's wrong. And that's what our education system is actually based on. So I think we do have adults that have learned what they know about failure from school, and it's really hard to implement this idea that you're allowed to fail. And when people fail, it can really be hard on them. So I think that that's why COVID is really difficult, because there's no way to succeed at this, really. And I've seen a lot of my, peers and people in my industry just really trying to make stuff all of the time, and like really producing lots and lots of work, and like creating, because they feel like that's how they're going to succeed at this COVID. But actually, I don't know if you can succeed at it. And I think that that's a really interesting place for people to sit in, and an uncomfortable place as well.
Yeah, I think at the start of this, there was a fantastic article that was written by somebody from Italy saying, you might think you're going to learn a new language, and you might think you're going to write a book, and you might think you're going to, do all these fantastic things. You're not. And I think we have to be realistic. Again, it goes back to what I was saying about having poor concentration. When we're in a situation of trauma, our brain goes into survival mode. And for some people, that can actually mean that they go into kind of fight mode, and they actually become, for a small number of people, they might become more creative, but it'll be for shorter bursts of time. For most people, actually, that ability to be creative relies on the big part of our brain, the sort of neocortex, which is the newest part of our brain that's really exclusive to human beings. And that's the part that gives us that creativity. So if we're in survival mode, we just aren't able to engage that. I think, though, we can take a little bit of success, and it might sound really trite, but being able to get up, have some structure to your day, get yourself showered, get yourself out for a walk, make yourself something to eat, read a book, part of a book, even setting ourselves small goals. My concern is if people think, that's it, can't do anything, and just, lie around all day. I heard a story of some man who said he hadn't got out of his pajamas for 6 weeks. That really worries me, because that's a sign of somebody who's depressed. It's having that sense you can have a little bit of control, and even if we can't do what we want, what we're able to do, to try and take a little bit of mastery over our own world. And that might be little things like, I've been eating, I've been sitting in this particular position in my lounge for the last 6 weeks. Well, actually, I'm going to sit somewhere different. I'm going to move my furniture around. I'm going to move my pictures around. I'm going to just do something that says, I've got this authority and this mastery.
Yeah.
Because you and I have talked before, Leyla, this is often very much like, feeling like people are imprisoned.
Yeah.
And when you're in prison, you have no autonomy. You're told when to get up, what to eat, when to eat, what to wear, where to go, and when to go there. So when people are moving out of prison, after long periods, they start having a little bit more autonomy, a little bit more mastery. So they might move into a unit where they can cook their own meals, or they might be out in the community and visiting family, or doing some kind of work outside in the community. That's all to build up, not only rebuild their skills out in society, but also to give them that sense of control that we need to get back. So while we're in lockdown, we do have a certain amount of control. We can decide when we go out for a walk. We can decide how often we go out for a walk now. We can decide where we're going to eat, when we're going to eat, what we're going to eat. These are things that we can actually decide. Even within those people who've got less resources, there are still some small decisions that can be made.
So that's a really positive note to end on. So I think we should end there until next time. But thank you so much for speaking with me.
Thanks, Leyla. It's been lovely.
No problem. Okay, I'll see you next time.
Cheers.